Well, also, there is a kind of uh, a new set of problems created if the federal government says we're out of this business, right? Because
Right.
then states will get into this business and cities will get into this business and other countries will get into this business. And frankly, I used to be a senior trade official in the US government, and our job when this was in the 90s when I was doing this, was that the world was a regulatory mess and you couldn't get to scale with anything. Companies couldn't plan properly if there were hundreds of different regulatory regimes. And so you wanted to harmonize it, you wanted to coordinate it. If our government opts out,
Yes.
others are going to opt in. And I see, I talk a little bit about it because you mentioned the regulatory patchwork quilt in the article, but we're already seeing California is going to do this with AI, and other states are going to do that with AI. And uh, I think if you're a company and you see that, you're like, uh-oh,
Yes.
I can't go to a VC and say, invest in me, because the VC is going to go, well, I don't know how scalable this will be, because they're going to be 15 different regimes.
Yes. And basically you're beholden to whichever one is the most restrictive. Not to mention, to your point about on the global stage, we're seeing more and more countries, regions, blocks. BRICS just announced they have a entire proposal on AI and data protection. I mean, you are going to see this race to be at the forefront of regulation in the absence of the US setting a standard, which is going to pull companies at the seams. Um, but to be frank, most companies are asking for some kind of guidance and boundaries. I don't think that they feel like Congress is ready to do it, but I know that they want the guardrails. They've said that.
Well, yeah, it's just, I think the lesson of history is that regulations will come, whether you want them or not. And so the question is, how do you want to manage that? And I've lived in Washington for the past 30 years, and so I'm really reluctant to put the word smart in front of anything, because it's just like a cheap policy formulation. But maybe with a small s, and not trying to coin a phrase. You need smart regulation, not no regulation, right? So I think this is a real challenge. Let me switch gears a little bit here, because I'm also interested in the cyber issues that you immersed yourself in for so much of your career, because this administration seems to have dismantled a lot of our cyber defense structure at precisely an inflection point, AI powered cyber, that you would think is the wrong inflection point. And I was just wondering if you might want to talk about that a bit.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of tension between the two topics, right? How do you say states should not legislate on AI, but also push all of the cybersecurity to states and local governments to take on? Because that's essentially what's happening. They are having to fill the gap because a lot of the requirements have become either voluntary or are not being spurred or pushed forward by federal procurement power or the other mechanisms that are in um, the federal toolkit. A lot of things like quantum cryptography has become optional for agencies to put into place. That is a huge opportunity for an adversary to wage an attack in the world of quantum computing and AI. When those two meet and they've got access to this data, and it's got not quantum resistant cryptography. What does that mean for us? What does that mean for the American people? So we put
Yeah,
our
and just to simplify that for people, essentially what you're talking about is the ability to have cyber attacks that solve defenses in real time, right? Is it,
yes. Well, that and like we've all seen that cryptography, encryption is protecting our data, whether in transit and rest, that kind of thing. The cryptography of today is not going to stand up to the supercomputers that are coming, the quantum supercomputers. So we did a lot of work in the federal government to come up with encryption that was resistant to that kind of supercomputer focused attack. That was a requirement to implement. It is no longer a requirement to implement. This is one example of some of the changes that are happening. Not that they've gotten rid of the work, but they've just rolled back some of the requirements to implement to further protect us. And so this move to shift a lot of things to voluntary rather than required, this move away from using federal procurement to shift industries into better behavior, that's a big lever that the federal government has. So if they say all of our cloud providers need to do X, all of our software providers need to do Y, the federal purchasing power, the size of these agencies is grand, it's enormous. That means that the entire market shifts if you want to enter into the federal market. And while you're doing for that, you might as well do it for the businesses you serve, the small companies you serve, that kind of thing. Those requirements have been removed in large part. And so these shifts are going to have far reaching impacts. You hope that things already in flight will continue, that companies will step up and anticipate that maybe the shift back in 3.5 years or so. But without the requirements, we're very much left to trusting that companies and individuals are advocating for more secure practices. And that has shown itself to not be the case in large part.